This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I just finished a speech, not in the last 5 minutes, but in the last couple weeks, about 500 people in Las Vegas at the Bellagio. So much fun. There's something about being on stage when you can give something back and people appreciate it. That feeling is so fun. Now, I've been doing this for a long time, and this podcast actually helps. Even if I don't give a speech for a very, very, very long time, I stay practiced on a podcast. The interviewing keeps you sharp. The monologues keep you sharp. It's just a great foundational practice for public speaking. Now, of course, I'm sure I got my own style, and it might be good, it might be bad. I know it's somewhat effective. I don't say that in a cocky way, just in a confident, learned way. And there's no doubt everyone listening right now wants the ability to speak with impact. You want to know how to command the room and influence others. We all want that. Frankly, we all need it. In this modern age, there's going to come a time where you need to stand up. My guest today, Allison Shapira, is right there in this headspace. Her new book, Speak with Impact: How to Command the Room and Influence Others. Allison dives into the nitty-gritty, kickstarting the creative process, composing a clear and concise message, getting rid of the filler words. Man, I have to do that all the time in this podcast. Not necessarily for me because I think about it, but so many guests don't think about filler words and they use them. What's a filler word? You know. Exactly. This is where Allison's work can really help. Not just on filler words, but the entire big picture of taking the stage and presenting, talking to an audience. And oh, by the way, there are some serious academic chops behind Allison and her work. She is an adjunct lecturer in public policy, focusing on the art and practice of public speaking at the Harvard Kennedy School. So clearly, a lot of people are paying attention, and I think perhaps you might want to pay attention as well, especially if you think at some point in time you might have to present, which is almost a guaranteed 100%. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Allison Shapira. So Allison, I was thinking in advance of this call, I had a particular question that I wanted to start with, but then literally looking at my phone in a series of links, I'm not even sure what webpage I was on, I see the headline from The Atlantic: Teens are protesting in-class presentations. Some students say having to speak in front of the class is an unreasonable burden for those with anxiety, and they are demanding alternative options. And my first thought was to say, oh my gosh, toughen it up. But then I thought to myself, I gave my first public presentation at a city council, age 19. 25 plus years later, I was in Beijing, China, in front of 1,500 people. And I'm a different guy than when I was at 19. There is a transition there. And I think what I love about where you are going with your work is because not that you're necessarily only appealing to, you're not appealing only to, for example, teens, you're appealing to everybody, but it is an anxious thing to stand up and to present. And I think that those teachers that maybe just want to throw kids into the fire, maybe if those kids understood more about all of the issues that were involved, it could dampen their anxiety.
That's such an interesting issue that you raised. I have not seen that article, but it's so interesting to hear that that was the response from the teens. First, anxiety is a very real issue, whether it's speech anxiety or otherwise. So it is something that affects so many people, adults and teenagers. It is not something to be taken lightly. Having said that, public speaking is such a critical career skill that it's a skill that teens, when they learn it, are immediately better positioned for any career that they will have going forward. So I do think that presentations are critical for teenagers in order to develop very real skills that they'll need in life. I also think it's important to have strategies to manage anxiety, which is what I put in my book as well. There are a lot of strategies for how you deal with your speech anxiety, because not just teens feel this, but even the most senior executives that I work with have a very real fear of public speaking.
I can recall, I think, giving a presentation in college is one of the first. I don't think I did this in high school, but if the teacher stood up at the beginning and said, this is going to feel like your stomach is going to be twisted in knots. You might want to throw up. You're going to be nervous. You're going to feel all these feelings. But, usually the way the teachers do it is just kind of sit back and say, okay, it's your turn, get up there. And, I think it'd be nice to have a little bit of a coaching before, because everyone has these feelings when they start.
Exactly. And public speaking is a skill. It's like telling everyone in the class, okay, every person's going to get up and play the guitar in front of the class, regardless of whether they know how to play the guitar. Pretty unreasonable. But if you give them some guitar lessons in advance, show them a chord or two, then when they get up, they're better prepared. So the real issue is not that they're being forced to play the guitar. It's that they're not getting, it'd be helpful to get some instruction beforehand so you know what to do before you get up in front of people. That's why training and coaching and skill building is so important.
When I think about speaking today, and of course I just outline my bias, I don't feel anything anymore. I just enjoy the process. I enjoy standing up and sharing something that I really think the audience might not have my perspective, so I want to give them something interesting. So I don't feel those nerves anymore. But there are quite a few experts out there, so to speak, that have all these insights, but they don't have the confidence that their insights are unknown by the audience yet, so they have that anxiety. Like, I've kind of twisted and blurred it all up, and I could ask a lot of more detailed questions of you, but there are these experts out there that really struggle with the public speaking, don't they?
Absolutely. There are a lot of people who know their subject, they know what they want to say. And then when it comes time to say it, they face a few different challenges. First, they may feel like others in the room know more than them, so that makes them feel self-conscious. Or they may not have the skills of speaking clearly and concisely. I think everyone listening can think of somebody they know in their organization who's an expert in a subject, but we'd never put them in front of an audience, because having subject matter expertise does not make you a good speaker. Having speaking skills makes you a good speaker, and having speaking skills means you also need to know your subject.
Let's take you back in time a little bit. You've kind of taken an indirect path, I think would be a fair way to phrase it, an indirect path to working your way to a place where many people would come to you for your insights and helping them at public speaking. Opera. So, I mean, you've already got some performance in you, but why don't you kind of outline that? I mean, that was your real passion. And then at some point in time, somebody said no.
Right. So opera was my first love, my first career aspiration. And I went to a performing arts high school and college for opera. And then when I got to college, I started to lose my passion for singing. I had spent so many years performing, training, teaching, learning, and competing that when I got to college, it had become a business instead of a passion. And then when you couple that with the very difficult conversation that I had with my voice teacher, which I share in the book, when she said, "You're not good enough to be an opera singer," it was this slap in the face, but it was also affirming something that I had already been feeling.
One of the words that I love in your work, and I think I'm looking through my own lens here. Whenever I talk to someone who's got some interesting insights, I always try to compare myself and figure out what can I learn. But I love the phrase, the word, authenticity, because to me, as someone who really doesn't have any formal training, that seems to be such a huge, huge element for an audience. If the audience can look at you, can hear you, can feel you, and really get a strong, gosh, I know where this person is going, that's half the battle. Like once they know you're real, whether they agree or disagree, that's not the point. But once they know you're real, you're already there. And that's, again, I look back in time and I say, God, I wish somebody would have said that to me back in the day.
Exactly. And that's one of the most liberating elements of public speaking for people. Because when people think of public speaking, they think of this formal presentation where you're standing in front of hundreds or thousands of people behind a lectern, all eyes are on you. And that's not the type of speaking situation most of us are in front of. Most of us are speaking up in a meeting or on a conference call or leading a meeting or a pitch. And so the persona that's needed for that is not that formal speaker. And I would argue that not even in front of hundreds of thousands of people do you need to change who you are. The key element is being yourself. But here's the thing, it's being yourself at your best. And what happens, because most people are afraid of or uncomfortable with public speaking, when they get up to speak, their nerves get the better of them. And so who they present in their speech is not them at their best, it's them at their worst. And my goal through the book is to help people be themselves at their best, which means using language that's authentic to them, which means looking inward to determine, why do I really care about this subject? And you said something very important. You said, when you get up to speak, you want to give the audience something interesting, which means you're thinking not about yourself, but about your audience and the benefit to them. And I find that people who recognize why their material is important to themselves, but also to others, get up with and speak with a lot less anxiety, because it's not about them being the center of attention. It's them standing up in service of their message for the benefit of their audience.
I caught I think it was a live presentation actually of the Rolling Stones recently. I think they were in Cuba, and gosh, Mick Jagger's got to be 75 plus. And man, was he bringing it. And I think that's another way that we can all think about public speaking, and hear you with the musical background. But in reality, I'm just a very slimmed down version of Mick Jagger. I mean, he's this musician, he's got, he's out there singing, he's performing. But as a person who stands on stage and speaks, you've got to do what Mick Jagger is doing. He is bringing the audience something that they want, right? If you stand on stage, and you and I have seen this a ton, if you stand on stage and it's somebody that's just filling a corporate speaking slot and they're just going through a PowerPoint deck and they really either don't have the training or don't care, my gosh, if there's hundreds of people in the audience, that's just, that's not any good for anybody.
Exactly. And I like to say there are no boring speakers, only bored speakers. And if you're bored with your subject, you will be boring for your audience.
I've had a chance, and I mentioned to you that I've had a chance to spend some time in Asia. One of the interesting things about Asia is their love of karaoke. You could generally have these very shy people, right? But if you get into a karaoke room with 5 or 10 or 20 people or whatever, I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone who's shy and reserved grab that microphone, and the next thing you know, I'm like, where did those chops come from? It's the most interesting thing, which is not something that we have, or at least on a wide basis in America. I would say the average American doesn't really grow up with a karaoke love, but they really do in Asia. And I would tend to guess that having that kind of experience is going to assist you. You've got some thoughts on karaoke, and I believe you have some skill at it, yeah?
Well, as a singer, it makes me, as a singer, I'm well positioned to do well in karaoke. However, as a singer-songwriter who plays guitar and sings, I prefer accompanying myself with the guitar, where I have more control over the key and the tone than I would in karaoke. But you're getting at a couple of important issues. The first is the benefit of a place like karaoke, where people can let go without self-judgment. And that's a really critical component of public speaking because usually we are our own worst critic. We know where the holes are in our arguments. We know where we should have spent more time preparing. And so we self-judge so critically before this speech. And even in our mind when we get up to speak, which is what holds us back from being authentic and present for the audience because we're constantly criticizing ourselves. In karaoke, anything goes. The rules are more relaxed. You can let go and just sing. And what I want people to do on stage as a result of preparing and practicing and skill building is to then let go and just share your message with the audience.
Is it a fair statement to say, and I'm kind of pulling this out on the fly, is it a fair statement to say that the audience, whatever audience for whatever presentation they are going to hear, whatever the content, that an audience most of the time is looking to have a sense of fun. They're looking to have a smile on their face. Even if it's a technical subject, I watch TED Talks. The audience wants to engage. They want to feel good. That's something that's, I think for a lot of first-time speakers, they don't get that.
Exactly. A lot of speakers will assume the worst in the audience. They will think the audience doesn't want them to do well or is going to throw challenging questions at them. And it depends on your audience. You might be going into a hostile situation. But as you said, most of the time, the audience wants you to do well and they want to have a good time. Nobody is going into a presentation or meeting or speech saying, okay, I want this to be boring. I don't want to be engaged. I don't want to have fun and I don't want to learn anything. They're there in order to take something away and hopefully enjoy the process while they're doing it.
Let me slide you into some specifics so somebody will not accuse me of not getting down to the heart of the matter. So there's some really key things when someone stands on stage, and you describe these well. And I would love for you to kind of give a little comment on each one and give people some perspective or a nugget or something they might not imagine. Eye contact, body language. The one that I'm going to push you on a little bit, I'm really curious about vocal variety. So eye contact, body language, and vocal variety. Educate my audience some.
Eye contact, body language, and vocal variety are three key nonverbal communication elements. And when I say nonverbal, I mean not the words, because with vocal variety, it's not about the words themselves, but the sound of their words. So let's start with eye contact. A good speech or presentation should feel like a conversation between the speaker and every member of the audience. And the way that you have a conversation in many cultures is through making eye contact. Now, you mentioned you're spending time in Asia. Eye contact is something that's very culturally specific. So in some regions and some countries, you don't make prolonged eye contact with someone who's more senior to you or a member of the opposite gender. So all of these components should be taken into context in the country in which you're speaking. But broadly speaking, eye contact is what allows you to create a relationship of trust with your audience. And what I recommend in the book is for people to look at one person and complete a full thought, and then turn to another person and complete a full thought. And in the process, they're connecting with one person at a time, which both makes the experience better for their audience and also is easier for them. With eye contact, you're both connecting more with the audience because you're having one-on-one conversations. You're also reducing your own nervousness because you're not scanning the room looking for, taking in way too many input from audience body language and room noise and everyone looking at you. You're just looking at one person at a time. You connect with them, you move on. So that's the technique that I recommend in the book. And I find it's transformational for people in their speaking because it slows them down and helps them be more present and more focused.
I do variations of that, but I'm going to, on October 2nd, use that one exactly for sure.
It's actually something that takes a little bit of practice because all of the tips that I put in the book are not intended for you to stand up in front of an audience and then try to practice all of them simultaneously live in front of an audience.
Oh, but hold on. I'm a professional crazy person, so it's okay.
It all depends on your audience and your goal. So you use at your discretion. Ideally, you would practice it you'd practice each skill one at a time. And so if you were going to incorporate this technique for your presentation in October, you can grab a few colleagues or friends or random people that you see on the street and practice to each one for a full thought. And you'll start to develop a rhythm, and then the rhythm becomes automatic. Body language is such a fascinating topic to cover. And the challenge is that there's no one right technique for body language. There's no one perfect hand gesture or foot movement that's perfect for every speech. It depends on the content, the message, and it depends on the audience. So what I tell people as a general rule is to say that whatever you're doing with your body, make sure it matches your words. So if you talk about size or distance or scale or time, place and time, you can use your hands to show that. With feet, I recommend that people walk around during their transitions, but then pause to make a point. And then they can walk during transitions and then pause to make a point. And those are practiced techniques. They don't come naturally, but then they can become natural once you've practiced them. And I always recommend that when people are working on their body language, they take a video of themselves speaking and then watch it back without sound and evaluate their gestures, their body language, whether or not they smile appropriately. Most people don't smile enough when they speak. And it's not about having a big, goofy grin when you're talking about budget cuts. It's about having a warmth in your face that a smile produces. And it also makes you feel more confident. So these are some of the components of body language. As you can tell, it's very nuanced. And it also, again, depends on the culture. What body language is appropriate in that culture? And that's something everyone has to ask for themselves for whichever situation they're confronted with.
Vocal variety is so interesting to me. I know that I don't have any formal training in anything, but I know when I do podcast episodes, especially when I do a monologue where it's just me speaking, I find myself just getting lost in the words, and I find myself going up and down in range. And I also find over time that's popular. People like that. And I don't necessarily know why. So that's why you're here today to teach me.
The subject of voice is something that's so critical in public speaking. It's something everyone tells you is important, but nobody ever tells you how to do it or how to affect the sound of your voice. And that's why my background as an opera singer is so critical here, because I know how to breathe in a way that produces a strong, resonant, powerful voice. And I know how to change the tone of my voice so that it reinforces the words. And a lot of times when you hear speakers get up and speak, because they're nervous, their throat constricts and it reduces their breathing, which means the voice that comes out it sounds like this, and it's choked up, and maybe they have vocal fry, or they sound like a robot and they just talk like this. So when we get nervous, it changes the warmth and strength of our voice, which is why in the book, I provide techniques for breathing and breath support that will both reduce your nervousness and also strengthen your voice. As a speaker, your voice is your instrument. Your speaking is akin to an athletic sport. You train for it, you warm up, you have to be physically healthy in order to perform at your best. And a lot of us don't realize that, so we don't take care of our voice. And as a result, when we get up and speak, we're held back from one of the most powerful components that's going to make our speech a success. So I always recommend that people treat their voice with care, treat their body with care, because the physical components of your health affect your vocal variety.
It might be a great opportunity just to kind of go on a side tangent here, since we have this nice little conversation about losing one's voice or something that interrupts a presentation, right? This is going to happen. Can't get around it. And it's a great opportunity for people to be real, to be more authentic, to smile more, to even kind of crack a little bit of a joke. It's not a bad thing. Again, this could be really hard for someone who's thinking of the idea of public speaking, very anxious about it. But once you get into it, you realize, my gosh, this is normal. I mean, I'm talking to you, you're a former opera singer, and you get, a scratch in your throat. It's normal, it happens.
Of course, it absolutely happens. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Again, because our body is our instrument, no one has perfect health. And this word perfection tends to trip people up. I was talking to a new client a couple months ago, and she said, my goal in our coaching is to become a perfect public speaker. And I stopped her and I said, there is no perfection in public speaking. There are two versions of every speech. There's the version you write and the version you give. And they are never the same, nor should they be, because it's not about being this perfect speaker. I mean, if you think about someone standing up on stage who always says the right thing and is smooth and confident and totally polished, they're an actor, by which I mean they're not authentic, they're not genuine. That's not where we relate to people most. We relate to people through their flaws, through their vulnerability, through their authenticity. And so when you get on stage, things will go wrong. And because the audience wants you to do well, they will be patient with you. It's not about what happens, it's about how you deal with it. And in the book, there are a lot of techniques for what do you do when things go wrong, from when the AV doesn't work, maybe your microphone cuts out in the middle, as happened to me, and there's a funny anecdote in the book about that, or if you don't feel well. I have actually had several times where I've been mid-sentence giving a presentation, and not only has my voice given out completely, but I've started choking and coughing with my nose running uncomfortably in front of the audience. It's been terrifying for me, but I've learned to understand when that happens. And for me, that's usually about a week after I get sick and then get better. And it's this nagging thing that still stays in my voice. And so now if I think that might happen, then I start the presentation by my introduction. And then I say, by the way, I had some health issues with my voice last week. In case something happens, here's the plan. This is what we're going to do. Do you think you can handle it? And they say, yes, we can handle it. Okay, great. And ironically, every time I've given that introduction, nothing has happened to my voice. So it's almost as if by being open about it, I've neutralized it as a problem.
How do you feel about this statement? I'm thinking about my own self again. I'm thinking back to public presentations over the last 15 years. I can think back to every presentation if I look at a list of them. Don't remember every detail, but what I do, and I don't know if the audience would be familiar with this thinking, I generally find that I learn something at each presentation. I feel like a big block of clay, and every time I do a presentation, I feel like, not necessarily on purpose, but I feel like I'm learning something new, and I get a little bit better, not to become polished like an actor, but just to do something a little bit better. And I find this is part of the process, getting to your point about perfection. There just isn't any perfection, even with people that have done this for a long time.
Exactly. So there are a couple elements you mentioned that are so important. The first is the fact that there is no such thing as perfection, as we've said. But the second element is the fact that you learn something and improve after every single presentation or meeting or conversation that you have. And one of the tools in the book is a debrief process. And it's essentially asking yourself 3 questions after every presentation. What went well? What didn't go well? What am I going to do differently next time? And I actually have a booklet, a workbook. I call it the speaker's logbook that I give to people, and they debrief every speech, and then they keep track quantitatively and qualitatively of their progress. Because you can give the same speech 100 times and never improve if you don't stop to evaluate how it went and take steps to get better. And that's what that's what this logbook prompts you to do.
Let me get into the notion of the writing of the speech. I can't say that I've ever officially written a speech line by line memorization. I'm usually a guy that's got some key points and I can fill in the areas, keep it flowing, know my times, and kind of have that kind of feel. But the other day, I had a gentleman on this podcast. He was a software engineer, formerly at Apple, worked closely with Steve Jobs. And he talked about Steve's presentations. So, those famous Apple presentations where Steve looks so natural. And this guy said, man, you can't believe how much Steve Jobs practiced for those presentations. So, I find there's this interesting polls. And it's not necessarily that one's right or wrong, but why don't you give your feeling and thought on writing the speech? What can people, beginners to experience, what's a good takeaway that people might not be thinking about that you could help us all on?
There are a couple of critical elements, and it depends on how important the speech occasion is and how well you know your material. The less important the occasion and the more you know your material, the less time you need to prepare. So if you know what you're talking about and it's just a quick update on what you've been working on, there's not as much preparation time. But let's assume you have an important speech on a subject you don't speak about frequently. What's the preparation process? And I outline a more thorough process in the book, but what I'll tell you is it starts by getting ideas out of your head and onto paper. And most people don't do that. And paper, it could be onto your laptop or onto your device. First, getting the ideas out of your head and into some place where you can look at them, then reading them out loud to make sure they sound like your words, your voice. A lot of times, unknowingly, we're simply parroting corporate jargon, the company jargon. And by speaking those words out loud, we can stop and say, wait a second, do I really think that? Do I really speak like that? How can I speak in a way that's authentic to me, but also clear, concise, and relevant for my audience? So speaking out loud is critical. Whether you write it word for word or write it in bullet points really depends on the occasion. Now, there are some high stakes presentations, and I would say an announcement from Steve Jobs that's going to be archived and on the internet forever, and people are going to make decisions about their behavior based on that presentation. That's something where you want to draft it out and write down exactly what you're going to say. When I gave a TEDx talk, it was a very short talk and I had a lot to say and I had to script it word for word, but it was my language. It was my way of speaking. Then I could practice it to the point that it felt natural. And I like to quote Peggy Noonan in my book. She was a speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan, who said Reagan was the most natural speaker in politics, but he was a natural because he practiced so hard. And the practice and preparation process is critical so that you're comfortable not just with the content, but with the flow of content and the language. And then when you get up and it looks like you're just talking, having a conversation with the audience, it's actually very practiced. It's practiced, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
It's one of those things where, getting back to the beginning of our conversation, talking about the teenagers. Oh my gosh, I keep thinking about that article now. It's like, okay, do you jump into the fire or do you not jump into the fire? And your response back was, well, hey, this is such a valuable skill. You almost have to jump into the fire. And the more I think about it, and the more I talk to you, I think, well, gosh, it really is one of those things. Even if, the teacher might need to do a better job of setting it up to bring some of that anxiety level down and explain some of the details that we're talking about. It's so terribly important. I know how much it's benefited myself to just have some inkling, some little bit of an idea of how to talk. It's just huge.
It's huge. And as you said, and I mentioned this in the book, public speaking happens anytime you communicate with one or more people with some goal. So it's not just getting on stage and giving a formal presentation. It's interviewing for your next job, whether it's in the company or outside of a company. It's speaking up in your community to protect an historic building or speak out on behalf of your children's schools. It's addressing the leadership team within your company or moving into the leadership team and then addressing your new direct reports in a one-on-one meeting, video telepresence, or phone call. All of these situations require public speaking. And when you think about where those situations happen, they happen in every industry. They happen at every stage of someone's career, but especially the more senior they become, the more critical their communication skills become, because it's through communication that they're promoting the company culture or the company strategy. It's through their communication that they become a role model for others. So that happens again at many different levels, but especially as you move up. And it happens in every country in the world. So I've led training programs and worked with people in all different regions of the world. The way in which you use these skills might be different in terms of eye contact or the structure of your argument. But in every country I have ever worked in, the questions are always, how do I calm my nerves? How do I quell the butterflies? Every human being feels butterflies to some extent before they speak. Should I write it out word for word or just speak extemporaneously? All of these questions are in the minds of people around the world, which shows this universal need to communicate and this universal fear of saying the wrong thing.
I like how you phrase this, just two words, and I kind of pulled it from your work. But when you think of public speaking and you just correctly outlined, it's not only getting in front of 1,000 people, it's getting in front of 2 people. But the key, and you point this out, with purpose.
Yes, with purpose. Every time you communicate, you have an opportunity to change people's behaviors, to change the way they think, the way they feel, the way they act. That is an incredible opportunity. It's also a huge responsibility. And there are people who use it for good and there are people who use it for evil, unfortunately. But every time you speak, that sense of purpose is critical. And we've all been in situations where we're in a room, someone gets up and sits down and starts speaking, and you're thinking, where is this going and how is this relevant to me? That's when they don't have a clear sense of purpose. And the more you connect with your own sense of purpose before you speak, it gives you the confidence to speak because you recognize that what you're saying is important for your audience. It's worth saying. And so you're saying it in the service of that message.
To get a little bit more specific into the process for someone that might be giving a presentation at some point in time in the near future, 3 more points pulled directly from your work, which really get me thinking in a way that, they're very simple points, but I really wasn't thinking this way. Where are you speaking? Where are you on the agenda? Who else is speaking? I've always kind of thought, well, I don't know if I really care too much who's speaking because I'm going to give my presentation independently. I'm not going to be influenced by someone else. So why don't you tell me, why should I be caring about who else might be speaking? Put some of those rationales on the table.
There's such important considerations. First of all, where are you on the agenda? Means, are you at the beginning of the day when people's energy is fresh? Or are you at the beginning of the day and at the conference the night before, there was a huge party with drinking and dancing, and now half the people are hungover and tired? Recognizing the state of mind of your audience when you get up to speak is critical. If you're at the end of the agenda, recognize that the conference or meeting will probably go over schedule. What are you going to do if all of a sudden your speaking time is cut in half? Are you prepared to get to the main issues in your presentation or speech on short notice? So that's why it's important to understand where you are in the agenda so you can understand the constraints that you may face. Why should you know who else is speaking? Comes from a number of different considerations. First and foremost, if you're speaking at a conference that's on a particular issue, and I've been in this situation, I've been to conferences where it's on a particular issue and every speaker says the same thing about the issue. And I'm thinking, enough already. I've heard it. All right, I get it. I'm with you. Can we move on? So the uniqueness of your message, while it may feel unique to you, if other people on the agenda are going to say the same thing, what do you need to do to really provide a more unique interpretation of this issue? And recognizing who else is speaking helps you determine what your unique value add is in that situation. Another reason why it's important
is because what if there are people in the audience or on the agenda who disagree with you? What if somebody is getting up to explain a completely opposite side of the issue that you're going to promote? In that case, your audience will have just heard the arguments of why what you say doesn't work, or maybe that person follows your speech. So, recognizing if there are people on the agenda who might disagree with you, that means in your presentation, you might want to preempt some of those issues and say, now there are some people you may hear today who will argue this other view on the issue. Here's why I tend to disagree, or here's how I see it in a way that's different. So, again, it's differentiation and recognizing, being prepared for when people might disagree with your view.
Okay, you've got this background. You've obviously figured a lot of these things out. This is just a big kind of research type question. Did you learn all this just by doing it? Or, I mean, what was the process for pulling this work together? Was it interviewing people, diving into other resources, your own personal experience? What was the cooking process, so to speak, to pull this together?
It's a combination of all of the things that you've mentioned. So I've been teaching public speaking for over 15 years, which means 15 years of learning from the people I work with who come to me with different situations. So in workshops, we get so many stories of situations people were in, and then we get to talk about how to handle them. And then later on, we get feedback on whether or not that worked. So there's an element of feedback that we get from the people we work with: what works, what doesn't, what are the situations that they're confronted with, which helps us see trends either across industries or within an industry. Then I've had the opportunity to study with communication experts such as David Gergen at Harvard University at the Center for Public Leadership at the Kennedy School. So he was an advisor to 4 US presidents and is an expert on the field of communication. And he at one point taught the arts of communication at the Kennedy School and brought me in to consult to that course. And I got to learn from him and his experience. And now I get to teach that exact course at the Kennedy School, which is a great honor. And then add to that, I'm constantly reading. I'm constantly reading books on public speaking. I'm reading research on connected subjects such as anxiety, such as voice and tone, and the connection between the tone of our voice and our business success. And there are some very interesting research studies that I point to in the book. And as a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, I have access to academic research on different issues. So it's a combination of anecdotes, 15 years of experience, studying with experts, and also reading a lot of research on the latest trends within public speaking and ancillary topics. That's the process that I went through, and I'm still going through, because every single day I'm learning and getting better in my field.
So you mentioned one of your mentors. You can start to think of a second and third one for perhaps. These could be distant mentors. I'll share with you 3 names that come to mind for me in terms of public speaking that I think are all 3. They're a little different. They're not, of course they're different, but I think they've been fantastic voices if somebody really wants to look at the spoken word. I've always loved Jerry Seinfeld. He's kind of quirky, but he's just really interesting. I always want to listen to him. And, Howard Stern is a professional speaker for 30, 40 plus years. And the one that I will really miss, because it was my favorite TV show and he just passed, Anthony Bourdain, I thought had a fantastic way of communicating. And those 3 voices to me, and I find comedians do a fantastic job of really showing you just by watching them and seeing their vocal variety, how they talk, the confidence. I find comedians are often great resources. Beyond David Gergen, do you have any other names that you might want to mention that have really influenced you?
The people who actually influence me the most are the people who are in the workshops that I do, because they're people they're ordinary people. And of course, everyone has something extraordinary about them. But what I mean is they're not professional speakers, but yet they're able to find their voice and their courage in those workshops and really stand tall and own their presence and own their right to speak.
On the flip side, though, I bet you if we probed some of those, quote, professional speakers, we would find out they all started the same kind of way. making a lot of mistakes and had to do a lot of practice before they got to the point of being considered a professional speaker.
Exactly. And the challenge these days is that any speech can be videotaped and put on YouTube. And so when we look at professional speakers, they've honed their craft. They've probably honed it in private. And now here we see these videos of them, which are the result of countless hours of practice and preparation. And yet, anytime you speak, as long as it's not a very private closed door room, there is the capacity for that to be posted online. And then all of a sudden, that's the standard by which you're judged. And it may not be you at your best, which is why the preparation and practice process these days is more important than ever. And also being very specific and clear about your messaging in that preparation process, because we've all been in the situation where we say something out loud in public and we think to ourselves, well, actually, that's not what I meant. But yet that becomes the soundbite. And so the preparation process becomes even more important because we don't get to make those mistakes as much in public as we could before they were videotaped and highlighted.
Yes, and you bring up an excellent point indirectly, which is creative editing. If you put something out there, somebody could cut off the front or cut off the back or whatever and leave you sounding out of context and saying something completely different than what you meant, even though it sounds like you're saying what you're saying. So people really have to be careful about that.
It's a constant challenge, you're right.
Allison, fun stuff. The book, Speak with Impact, How to Command the Room and Influence Others. I love this kind of stuff. I hope you can tell. I'm going to talk to somebody who trains people. I wish I could come to one of your seminars and even learn some of the finer details so I can get past my guessing stage or my intuitive stage. I'm sure there's a ton of little things and big things that I have no idea, but I've seen a lot of them in your work. Most appreciated. Is there a website we can send people to, a best website?
Globalpublicspeaking.com is the website for me and my company, and also the best resource for the book. It's at that website that people can sign up and then get a free chapter of the book so they can read, they can see the value in it even before they buy the book. Globalpublicspeaking.com is the website.
Thank you for taking some time today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for highlighting such an important issue. As you've rightly noted, it's critical to you and the work that you do, and it's critical to the work that all of us do, regardless of the industry, the stage in our career, or the country. And I want to remind people that public speaking is a skill, not a talent. You don't have to be born with it, and you don't have to be perfect. What we want, what audiences expect, is authenticity. And when that authenticity comes out together with the skill of preparation, then you can influence the world around you for the better and truly speak with impact.
Great stuff. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity to have my work highlighted and to be able to share it with people because it's so important.
I feel lucky to do this podcast. I get to talk to a terribly wide range of people and so many different insights. And I get to just keep practicing talking every time I do an episode. So it's great.
It's a great practice for you. And also you do a great job and you highlight so many different subjects. I really appreciate that and admire that.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash, or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.